Of course, the cost of reinventing back office operations, attracting the requisite expertise in the day-to-day operational overheads, minus the economies of scale of the Australian Tax Office, that would come at a price tag. I think the solution lies somewhere between these two options. The precise role and functions of the Commonwealth regulator is also complicated. The vast majority of the hundreds of thousands of not-for-profits are state-based entities with little or no appetite to operate beyond their immediate domain. As the corporate regulator, the Commonwealth would be formally responsible for a relatively few number of entities, although the much larger ones, to be fair. And so a national regulator is going to require the cooperation and engagement of the states and territories, and not every state and territory will be in the mood to agree with this government agenda for all sorts of good and perhaps not so good reasons. Talk about another tough issue, the taxation reforms. You should have probably got the High Court here to talk to you because they have as much impact about the not-for-profit sector as we do. And so we've got to look at, of course, one of the vexed issues, and this is maybe not something which keeps you all up at night, but I suspect for many of you who are prudential about the future of your sector, the tax treatment of charities is a complex issue. We've got to balance our role in government as a prudent fiscal administrator with our desire to provide financial support to the not-for-profit sector and to encourage the not-for-profit sector to innovate and expand their own revenue streams. Only this week, you might have seen in the Financial Review that the full bench of the Federal Court found that a community bank operator was established for a main or dominant purpose of a community service and could avail itself of charitable tax concessions. This builds on the Word Investments case decided in 2008. That, in effect, has endorsed that non-profit entities can apply for tax concessions for the benefit of their unrelated commercial activities. What this really goes towards is, and many in this room may hold the view that such concessions are a reasonable way for government to offer indirect support for the community sector. Others would say, question whether or not the commercial operations of these entities are in fact charitable in nature. The Treasury boffins, probably not numerous here, but they are numerous in Canberra, would also question the impacts of such policy upon the principle of competitive neutrality, or in a layperson's terms, whether or not there's a level playing field for like businesses if some benefit from tax concessions by virtue of their business associations. There's another complex issue which we're working on, is defining what is charitable. Similarly, the question of who and how we should define what is a charity will elicit a range of views. One option for the government is to codify the definition of a charity. Codifying the standard definition would provide greater clarity around whether a particular organisation or activity is charitable and remove such deliberations from the hands of the ATO and ultimately the courts. Once brought into statute, the government of the day would have the opportunity, if it controlled the Senate, to alter the definition to ensure that it reflects modern society and community needs. Yet as I go on, I'm sure for some of you, you're thinking the support of each of you about whether or not we should codify a definition of a charity would depend on what precisely falls within that definition. Your view may well be different to that of the government of today, or indeed the government of tomorrow, or that of the government of yesterday. Let's go to that vexed issue within what is a charity, political advocacy. What is advocacy to one may seem as inappropriate conduct to another. Personally, I think that political advocacy is an inevitable part of the work of a not-for-profit organisation, to the extent that when you deal with individual problems of disempowerment, the idea that you can't then join the dots between individual problems and look at, therefore, the systemic problems underpinning the disempowerment, to me is just asking you to ignore what the root causes of many of the issues you deal with. But that is a personal opinion. And you should be aware that the halls of Parliament are filled with advocates for many things. And to quote the Leader of the Opposition, as I very rarely do, not all of them are as pure of heart as the litigants who've developed the recent jurisprudence on this point. For instance, again, I make no particular comment about the view, but let us be clear that people who might work in the third world who might advocate birth control, or people who might advocate solutions for the protection of the environment, could be seen as intolerable political advocacy of charities by some in our community. There could be those who see that the use of poor taste placards That was just a point to remind everyone of that. But the more serious point is, of course, political advocacy. And it's not a clear-cut issue, and one has to be respectful of the range of views. And of course, if you start codifying the definition of charity, you start moving to a range of areas which perhaps might be unintended consequences from the good intentions of the first steps. And of course, in the new parliamentary paradigm, the view of our crossbench friends and colleagues and the Senate would be of no doubt interest to all as we develop these issues. Of course, again, because whilst I haven't been totally captured by Treasury since I've moved from disability to Assistant Treasurer, there is the point about extending the breadth of revenue, or the breadth of the definition will come at a revenue cost. My point in outlining some of these challenges is not trying to create an excuse, nor is it to shirk the challenges. Rather, it's just an attempt to illustrate that the actual hard questions are not easy to answer. They will certainly, in answering it, prove that reform is not easy, that some answers may be unpopular, and inevitably there may even be some trade-offs. Now, I'm confident that reform can happen and that there can be partnership with the sector. I think that the Gillard government can leverage the insights and the experiences of ACOSS and all the organisations here, and make sure that reform is implemented in pressing areas. I think we have made some progress. My colleague, the Minister for Human Services and Social Inclusion, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, has led the work to establish the Not-for-Profit Sector Reform Council. We have some mighty representatives there, including, of course, the CEO of ACOSS, Dr. Goldie, and Mr. Quinlan, the Executive Director of Catholic Social Services Australia. So those questions he is asking, he'll be able to assist answer us. And the Council is already playing an important role in terms of providing sector advice to the role of the national regulator, the streamlining of Commonwealth government tendering and contracting processes, the harmonising of fundraising and other Commonwealth, state and territory laws. We have established, at long last, the Office for the Not-for-Profit Sector in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to coordinate and drive these reforms and support the work of the Reform Council. I do think that the National Compact hasn't disappeared, perhaps in the manner which it was implied. We have ACOSS as one of the founding signatories. We saw more than 2 years of hard work by Senator Stevens. It's an agreement that sets out how we should work together. 565 organisations have committed to the shared vision. As you know, we are trying to streamline tendering and contracting processes for the paperwork you have to fill in. These things, standard reporting reduces the burden on the not-for-profits. Our Department of Finance has introduced general contractual terms. We've introduced the successful private ancillary fund reforms in 2009. We are trying to more strongly engage with the philanthropic sector. If I can make one last point, though, not about so much reporting on the government, but some observations of someone who's been an advocate for disempowered people for 14 years in the union, and again through the work in the disability sector. I do think that there's some things that the not-for-profit sector can fix up without relying upon the government. And I go to the issue of people. I do believe that as a sector, it is capable of examining more strongly its own HR practices. Again, this is a personal opinion. We've never been very good at measuring people's emotional labour. The people, you all, and the people you work alongside every day, you commit yourselves not just intellectually and physically, you commit yourselves emotionally to the people you work with. It is an undervalued feature of Australian society. Personally, I'm very supportive of the proposition being put of the revised work value, because I see it's an overdue factor. How do we measure people's emotional commitment? The people you work alongside with, and indeed yourselves, you can't afford to have bad days. If your kids have been up all night, if you've had a sick baby, you've sort of come to it because the people who, and you can't be in a bad mood, the people who rely upon you, they take their tune from you in all sorts of perceptible and imperceptible ways. So I think that there's a challenge in the not-for-profit sector to be the best employers they can be. I think there's a challenge in the not-for-profit sector to employ more people with disabilities within their own ranks. I think there's a challenge within the not-for-profit sector to provide greater leadership training. Where will the future Frank Quinlans and Cassandra Goldies come from? What is being done within your organisations to train up the next generation of leaders? Furthermore, what's being done to train up the people that you empower to actually become leaders within your own sector? Now, I know many of you have thought about these questions. All I'm suggesting today is that there are things that you can change and there are things that you can't change without the help of others. This last topic I'd just like to volunteer as something that you can change without waiting for anyone else to suggest it to you. Thanks. Have a very good